away from philosophy as possible.
Oh yeah. Well, it should be recording
Because
now, so we just started.
well,
So.
yeah. Well, because I think writing something that's philosophical in particular, you've got to be so careful, because you basically, if you make a mistake or you say something wrong, you're leaving yourself like wide open to criticism, and obviously philosophers all the time. So I was trying to more, I think, just talk about what was on my mind rather than like getting bogged down in like, justification of certain positions and stuff like that. But yeah, feel free to whatever you wanted to say at the start of you.
No, that's fine. No, that's it's good. So yeah, so what we're talking about, as you will likely find out, whoever watches this, is Nathan. Well, today we have Nathan Ormond joining us. So just before we even get into what we're going to talk about, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and the kind of content that you produce?
Yeah, sure. So I've got a YouTube channel called Digital Gnosis. On that channel, I've got various things. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, by the way, as well. I don't know if you're either sharing a thing on the screen or if your audio's coming out somewhere.
Oh, it might just be like my computer. I'm not sure. How is it bad?
It's not too bad, but just when I can hear myself, it's kind of distracting. Like when you can hear yourself a second behind. But I can just turn it down a bit when I'm talking.
Okay.
So yeah, I guess on my channel, Digital Gnosis, I've got various kind of interviews with people from various religious traditions, philosophers, mathematicians, scientists. I've also got a bunch of open conversations, which is where I'll invite people on. Also series criticizing apologetics. So I've got a bad apologetic series and a bunch of episodes as well, just kind of ad hoc, where I thought I was going to watch something and I'd provide a commentary over the top of some of my thoughts, and where I think apologetics is basically pretty toxic for the most part and goes wrong in a ton of places. And that's not to say that the counter-apologetic side is free from all that stuff either, but it really upsets me when this kind of Americanized worldview salesmanship type thing that evangelicals in particular seem to be into. So I've done a lot of stuff criticizing that as well. And then what else is going on my channel other than that? I mean, not much really. I'm going to have some videos looking at like me doing some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu stuff, and even going out and doing street epistemology style conversations with people. Though I want to do a little bit different from the way that some of the people in the street epistemology camp have done, more kind of just Socratic questioning in general, and maybe try and help give people a bit more of a positive, like how can we start to build up some of the, like if you've got some beliefs that don't have justification, how can we start to work on like thinking this through in a better way as well, which I think is an important on the tail end of that. But yeah, so that's all the stuff that's going on in my kind of sphere of the world.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring up the street epistemology thing. I didn't know what to think, like what you're if anything was gonna change based on like what your blog post, all the stuff yeah, you do a lot of stuff. Anyone that watches your channel will see like this just amazing variety of things that you have, whether it's like you said, I've seen the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you had some like way back in the past, I think when you first started doing some YouTube stuff, but you made one invalid argument in a video with hundreds of arguments, so everything you say is invalid. So
that's true. Yeah.
No one should listen to anything he says just because of that mistake. Anyway, so again, before we get into the blog post, also, let's actually go through, because the conclusion of the blog post was basically that you are either consider yourself a Christian or you're trying to be a Christian again. Yeah. But before we even get there, let's just back up to what was your religious background and upbringing like?
Yeah. So, sorry, were you going to add something else into that?
Nope.
Okay. So yeah, like during my childhood, pretty secular. Like, I mean, I'm adopted, and my adoptive parents don't have any religious proclivity or anything like that. They're not particularly philosophically inclined or really that politically inclined or anything like that. So I guess thinking about things, it maybe in that big picture kind of sense isn't something that has been sort of put on me by upbringing or anything like that.
Right.
I mean, primary school, I guess, in the UK is broadly connected to a kind of loose Christianity where there's kind of hymns and things in the morning that you'll sing in school, but they were even, as I remember, pretty secularized in some places. So maybe there'd be one that might be about quite Christian in a sense, and then there'd be another one that seemed more like it was just trying to, like somethingism type thing. It just kind of general, like, let's be happy and share and stuff like that type hymns. So I guess I guess Christianity could be sort of would have been what I would have identified with culturally, and certainly was a part of my upbringing, but in a looser sense than, I know a lot of Americans who I'm friends with or talk to, like they really were brought up like in the church, like Sunday school, parents who homeschooled even, stuff like that, and nothing like that for me. I think then I'd probably have classified myself as agnostic for a very long time, though again maybe having some sense of kind of somethingism, like I didn't have like a fleshed out reductive naturalism. I think even a few years maybe I might have been more like an edgy atheist type, like this is probably when the Dawkins and was I familiar with any of the other ones? I think it was mainly Dawkins, or like Brian Cox in the UK was a pretty, he's like a physicist at the Uni of Manchester. And basically these people, you see them talking to religious folk and kind of say, here's why this is wrong in these various ways. And I kind of identified at the time with like the sciences and stuff that I was enjoying at school. So I was like, well, I'll kind of define my identity against the humanities type subjects and against the people who are religiously inclined and take on this identity a bit more, science, I don't know what's the Facebook page. I don't know if you want me to swear on the chat. I effing love science. Yeah, I fucking love science, like that type of thing.
Right.
I was probably like in that kind of cringy camp. And then I think I moved more again towards like just weird breakdown of those sorts of beliefs. Again, I think there's a combination of things involved in that move. Probably me being mentally ill is one of them. So I think like I get quite depressed and kind of trying to form some kind of meaningful narrative about my past experiences in life and make sense of things. Probably moved me to like I can't. It's not healthy for me to sort of view the world in this reductionist sense where it's almost like a nihilistic, like I'm just a biological machine for replication, and I can't actually engage with the way the world manifests to me phenomenologically, like like experiences of like this is a good thing. I'd constantly be like, well, it's not actually good, it's just my brain doing this or that. And I'm not saying that you have to be that way as an atheist or anything like that, but I'm saying that's what I was doing, and I was recognizing this is bad, and there's something wrong with the paradigm I had adopted. And then I did psychedelics and stuff. I think that's something that again sort of pushed me more towards like maybe like wooey type, like Joe Rogan talking about DMT aliens and stuff like that. This is like 17 years old or something. And then I had a bunch of experiences around being adopted and a couple of pretty big surgeries and stuff. I've talked about this as part of why I originally moved into becoming a Christian. So because I was struggling at the time, Jordan Peterson really appealed to me. He seemed to be offering kind of hope, meaning, and purpose. And then the debate that he did with Rebecca Goldstein and William Lane Craig, that was the first time I really, I think, saw like a Christian apologist who was putting forward Christianity as like a viable alternative. So I guess I started probably watching YouTube videos, and the algorithm started recommending me things, and I was just kind of consuming Jordan Peterson, engaging in like Reddit forums and stuff, like dipping my toe in the water of like r/Christianity or and I think just various suggestions. So like I remember a question at the end of one of those Jordan Peterson lectures when he did the psychological interpretation of the biblical series ones, where someone said, me and a few friends in a Bible study were talking about this question, what do you think? And it wasn't it was just the fact that I was like, oh, that's something people do. People sit down and study the Bible. So I found like a local Bible study, went to it, started reading the Bible, but I didn't know enough about Christianity at the time to be cautious, because I knew nothing about this is like this is a fundamentalist Calvinist evangelical church.
Right.
So I turn up and start talking about Jordan Peterson's Tiamat and Marduk having a fight, and fighting the dragon of chaos and stuff like this, and Christ is the archetype, and they're taken aback a little bit. But eventually I ended up adopting more and more of their beliefs to the point of becoming a sort of fundamentalist evangelical. And I'd say that, that it wasn't just pressuring, it was also consuming all this, like this culture wars type media that's kind of prevalent on YouTube. People like Steven Crowder or Jesse Lee Peterson, who define themselves as being in opposition to the liberal worldview, that made me think there's something going on in terms of spiritual warfare where LGBT rights being promoted is part of this grand narrative. And me figuring out Christianity is true is part of me joining a camp on these issues. And so I was synthesizing stuff in this mad way that I don't think was right, but that kind of led to me radicalizing more and more, I think, and polarizing my thought in terms of in-group, out-group tribalism. Then through a series of toxic kind of engagements with a particular ministry trainee who was in that church, he basically was pressuring me into getting married. It was this idea of, I was in a relationship before I became a Christian, and it was this idea of, you're living in sin. It's better to be married if you've got these kind of lusts that you can't deal with. So then at least you're not in sin, and pressuring me in that direction. I ended up proposing, and I don't think it was right for us at the time at all in the place we were in, and she converted to Christianity as well. But then it all had kind of gone off. I wanted to try and study philosophy. I was finishing doing like a degree apprenticeship, so I was working full time and doing a degree in software engineering. And I was thinking, well, after I finish this, I can plan and save up to go and do philosophy. She, because of the Christianity, I think wanted to settle down and have kids right away. I think he didn't like that I was studying philosophy, was kind of convincing her that this was a false idol. So me reading books and stuff was an idol. Yeah. And even to the point of sitting us down and like, before we have this conversation, let's just pray, God, if God, if we have idols in our heart, like studying philosophy rather than getting married, then
oh my God,
help us to come to see them. Yeah. And then at this point in time, I also spoke to a guy called Pine Creek, who's got, he was a Christian for a while. He's got a channel where he does a lot of counter-apologetic stuff, kind of poking fun at Christianity. I think that really helped me get out of the fundamentalist mindset. And then also the trauma, I suppose, of this relationship falling apart and my reaction to that and stuff. Engaging with people in the world, having sex with people, and realizing that it wasn't... the people who were in the other group were actually humans like me, and were just as informed on all these issues and stuff like that. My faith kind of deconstructed over time. I was sort of dipping into atheism and agnosticism for a while. And then more recently I suppose up to now being the point where I'm saying, well, I'm happy with reconstructing a kind of Christianity, or saying that that's the paradigm I want to engage with. I enjoy going to church and being a part of this tradition and stuff, but it doesn't mean that I actually have all these answers. And I think there's a bunch of harmful stuff that's involved. I still want to be a critic of those areas. I don't have a complete like metaphysics that's going to make sense or knock down arguments, but for me, this helps me to be a better person, and that's all there is to it. And I think that was really what I was trying to communicate in that blog post, which is then what brought us to now having this conversation.
Yeah, no, there's actually, you answered some of the questions I was going to ask. I was going to try to get the narrative of like, your upbringing and how you kind of evolved and your deconstruction and sort of laid all that. If Pine Creek's watching this, you can cry. I know you're crying. I know you're crying right now just because you lost your deconvert. He's coming back. No, it's funny. Some of the things, just as you're saying all that, I can just imagine, because I came from, I was kind of raised within pop evangelicalism and moved to a more confessional Calvinism. But I can just, I'm just putting on that hat again. I can just, if I were watching you say this and your thirst for meaning. I'll be like, it's because it's true. It's because my version of fundamentalist Christianity is true, and now you're starting to get on the right track. And I just gotta, so I wouldn't be surprised if we get certain reactions from this blog post, people trying to nudge you back onto the fundamentalist path.
Oh, I've noticed that even some people saying things like, "This is a true conversion experience. I can read it," and then I read some of the stuff that they're layering into what I've said,
right?
And I'm like, oh, you don't get it. You don't get it. It's not. Yeah.
You were always saved. You came back, and this is just the first step on the path back to. Anyway, you got to interpret in some kind of framework. There's a couple other things you said too, where you said you weren't necessarily like a reductive, naturalist at different points, and this is kind of off topic, but yeah, I've definitely. J.L. Schellenberg as a philosopher kind of appeals to me, and I know he has ultimism and has these different ideas, and I think that's interesting just to explore. I haven't read all of them on that, so I'm not going to comment, but I think it's interesting to explore. Myself, I would consider myself a tentative atheist, but I don't have, again, everything worked out as to what that means. What are my metaphysics ultimately? I don't know. At this moment, I don't believe in the omni God or gods, whatever. But so coming back, you sort of laid out your story, and do you want to lay out? I mean, you can lay out the broad, structure of your blog post, and then we can kind of take it apart if you want.
Okay.
So just kind of lay it out at first.
So I think at the start, what I wanted to communicate with people was that this wasn't a rigorous philosophical defense of, here's Christianity, here's why it's true, here's a bunch of deductive arguments or anything like that. I just wanted to classify some of the beliefs I hold and sort of layer how I'm using bits of language and say, so when I talk about knowing things, here's what I mean by that. And I even maybe regret, and I'll talk about what's in some of the classifications, but I maybe regret going about it that way because some people have missed the point, I think, in another direction by saying, oh, well, you're saying you're an infallibilist, but you're classifying knowledge and high credence beliefs, and how does that work? I'm just trying to talk about how I use the bit of language know. So I wouldn't say, would I say I know that I don't know a God exists or something? That would just sound really goofy and inappropriate grammar or something. So when I'm talking about things that I know, I can't see how I could fail to be wrong about something like I exist or I'm, there are appearances, but I don't think that that's what constitutes knowledge. I said I'm a fallibilist about knowledge. I think it's just sort of probabilistically sort of hold beliefs. Though again, I don't think a complete sort of Bayesian reduction is going to map exactly onto how human belief systems work either. So I went with basically that there's very few things that I take myself to have knowledge about, because I actually think metaphysical positions like idealism live options. So I wouldn't want to say I know that there's only this external material reality or something and everything's reducible to that, because I'd say I've got a higher confidence level in the appearances of reality, and then materialism is an inference based on sort of accounting for those appearances, and it doesn't, by my lights at least, idealism isn't completely ridiculous, even if it is not what I go with. So I didn't want to put that in the knowledge category. So then I was like, well, what are high confidence beliefs though? And that idea that there is a mind independent external reality is one that I have pretty high confidence about, along with a bunch of other stuff. So that I don't know that a God exists, that I don't know that a particular meta-ethical theory is the right one, for example. That's not something that I take it that I know, or that this religion is true and that one's false, that Jesus resurrected from the dead. I'm trying to think about some of the other ones that I put in that category, really. Maybe I should have had it up in a Chrome tab while we're going to talk.
I actually have, I was going to go through some of it that I thought was really interesting too. So this section is just more of a broad outline, and then I was going to kind of go through some of the ones.
Okay,
so even if you don't want to pull it up, it's up to you. You can pull it up if you want to. But
okay, yeah, I've just quickly pulled it up. So yeah, a bunch of stuff. So the Bible's a product of human authors and contains many errors historically and morally. It documents complicated human history. That religious apologetics can be pretty toxic, and that religion is harmful in a lot of cases for most people who deconvert, and for a lot of societies, but also that religion can be very, very valuable and a good thing as well if done in a different way. And then I put this last category of things I have faith in. Now, I suppose this is a type of belief if we take belief to just be sort of assenting to an opinion or something. But I don't think of these as being something that I have a high credence in or anything like that. I don't even know how I would begin to go about offering justification for them. They're sort of thoughts that won't go away or something like that. Things that I have a hope in. So ultimately, I don't want to use that language because it always reminds me of William Lane Craig talking about how ultimately you can't have all these things on atheism. I didn't want to make out like that was the picture I was painting, like versus atheists can't have these things or can't do good things or something. I was describing from my point of view, my experience has been that this idea that the narratives we live in our lives are significant beyond the sort of minds that are local on planet Earth or something like that, significant in a cosmic sense, seems inescapable to me. It's just always there, that everything, that the way we live these narratives is sort of teleologically aimed towards the good, whatever. Again, there's a lot in that. I don't think that that's something that I could offer an argument for, but it's a thought that just won't go away. And this is where again, I begin to sound like horrible apologists, like Stuart and Cliff Knackley, when they say there's no atheists in foxholes type thing. That's not what, I don't want to say it that way, but I can say for myself that whenever life gets tough, I start thinking that way. And there's always this thought of, that there is a sort of good, and I'm trying to orient my life towards it or live in that way. And so I put these things down as faith beliefs because I think they're kind of idiosyncratic to the beliefs that I try to justify, because I don't think a lot of them are justifiable. I don't even think a lot of them are particularly rational, or I don't understand how I could offer the correct reductions for them. I mean, it'd be pretty weird, I think, for me to be like, I live this way, but also I think I was just indoctrinated as a child and I'm fond of those memories. So I'll give some Freudian explanation or something like that. Though that could be the case and why I have them. It wouldn't change that I do have them and live in that way. And that was what I wanted to articulate, I guess, that I have these kind of weird beliefs that for me fit within the Christian tradition, and then that I find participating in church and participating in Christianity, even though it's toxic in a bunch of ways, when I can try and reform it and try and do it in a different way, offer a different point of view. So when someone's trying to read into a passage in the Bible that, this off the cuff sentence is how we establish a metaphysics of animal rights or something, or that animals don't have rights. I can kind of say, well, isn't this a person writing in this particular culture where they thought that way? And doesn't that make the text that much more engaging when we try and look at them as humans and get at what's actually going on behind it? And then we ourselves engage in that process of trying to process our own experiences as a group of people who are here reading this text. I find that stuff really valuable for my life. It's not to say everyone else does or has to, or if you don't feel, especially it's not to say if you feel that way, you're going to hell or something. One of the things that I've said I hope for is that this idea of a teleology towards the good is actually a kind of Christian story about universal salvation. Now, does that mean, it sounds kind of bizarre and crazy to me. Does that mean I think that that's actually going to happen one day? I find it hard to conceive Jesus coming down on the cloud. Like, that seems like a madman talking as I hear those words come out of my mouth. But it's something that I genuinely do hope for, that everything will be set right and this life is sort of the porch to something else. But it's not like a justifiable position, I don't think. So anyway, that's to say that's the faith section. And then I talk at the end about this idea that the metaphysics and the philosophy, though I'm really interested in it, isn't all that important to me. And it comes down to this decision of how I want to live my life. And I found that having this reverence for divinity is something that helps me to be a better person and do things like helping homeless people, whereas I would feel more inclined to overlook them when I'm not thinking that way. And I want to be more like that person, the former person, than the latter. And this isn't, as well, just to reiterate, this isn't to say that people who are atheists don't do this stuff. There's plenty of people who are atheists that do. But I'm living my life, and as I reflect on my experiences and things, I think, yeah, I want to be the best that I can, and that means being this way as opposed to the other one. I prefer that. It makes me feel better, and I think it's better for the society and the people I live around and stuff as well.
Well, you just need to stop being a phony Christian. That's what you are.
Yeah, that's right.
No, it's interesting. You could just justify all these beliefs by just saying, God told you in such a way that you can't be wrong about it. I mean, you can go those kind of paths if you want to, but
yeah,
it doesn't seem like you're as fond of that. So now that you've kind of laid out everything, let's backtrack and kind of go through it a little bit more in depth or specifically. So one of the things, just out of my own curiosity too, not all of this is relevant to the main point of your post, but so for example, one of the things you said was that science is the best guide to reality, and you made a comment about how that relates to philosophy. I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit more just about that.
Yeah, sure. So I think that particularly within philosophy, there's a tendency to do armchair theorizing, which is what I'm doing right now in a comfy armchair, where it's sort of decoupled from what our best scientists have to tell us about the world. And there's a really great chapter in a book called Scientific Metaphysics by Kincaid, and I think Ladyman and Ross are the other editors. But it's like each of the chapters is by a particular author, one of those type books. And basically what I think it's chapter 3 or thereabouts talks about a naturalized ontology versus non-naturalized or something like that. And it talks about a bunch of theories, metaphysical theories that metaphysicians take to be live options that have been demonstrated to be empirically false. So Humean supervenience, for example, being one of them. Or I'm trying to think of the other examples that he gives. There was something about fermions and being infinitely divisible. But that's just to say, basically, people who are doing philosophy can kind of decouple these philosophical tools from what other domains of human inquiry have to tell us about reality. And I think that, that's it's a deficient way of doing philosophy, because firstly, you're forcing someone to make a choice between your kind of intuitions and speculation and what this other pretty well established field has to tell us about something, if you want to convince anyone else of what you've got to say. And secondly, I think that what the scientists have to tell us is pretty good. Now you can get into a whole philosophy of science thing as to why. Is it just because it's pragmatically useful? Is it just a useful fiction and it's not actually got anything to do with the world? I don't have answers again to any of that stuff, but I think it seems to me that it's pretty good at telling us about the way the world is. And so any philosophy that I do, I want to at least have the requirement of it being consistent with all that stuff, what our best scientists have to tell us. So if I can explain why two magnets attract each other, with something that's going to make some predictions which come true, and it's kind of fleshed out, it tells me about the underlying reality. Or I can just say that iron has a sympathy to move towards this other kind of iron. I'm going to go with that sort of more scientific type explanation than the weird sort of scholastic sympathy that doesn't tell me anything, and it doesn't do much for me that's useful. And then there's all this other stuff that science has to tell us about the world. For example, about the universe not being scale invariant. So as things get really small or really big, they're quite different to the way they are at our kind of scale. So talk about like quantum mechanics or big kind of universe cosmology type stuff, and stuff to do with our cognitive biases and heuristics. What does psychology have to tell us about how our brains work, how we form beliefs, how we tell ourselves stories about the world? Are we going to reach conclusions that we think are justified when they actually aren't, based on fallacious reasoning? More than likely, yes. And we've got to, I think, incorporate all this stuff into doing philosophy, rather than just thinking that having clear and distinct ideas is going to be good enough or something like that.
Yeah. But I want my wild armchair speculations. I don't know why you want to rob people of their wild armchair speculations.
Well, I think they're valuable as well. They are valuable as well, but they've got to be married.
Right. One of the other things you said that you don't know is that you don't know that God exists. And first of all, yes, you do, deep down in your heart. But what are your reasons? Or what are your thoughts on that statement? Like, why would you say that you don't? That's not one of the things that you know. If you elaborate a little bit.
So I think it probably the skeptic who's listening to me talking about some of the things that I'm describing as sort of faith positions, some of the criticisms that they have of those thoughts also going on in me as I say them and think them. So the idea that I'm just wanting it to be true, it was indoctrinated into me, it's a way of dealing with depression or life being overwhelming, all these sorts of things, that's also going on with me. So that gives me good reason to sort of, I think, question the appearance, because there's a story to be told there about why I would have this appearance of like a God is providentially working through reality and narrative or something. There's a good account for that isn't actually God working through narrative. Right. And I think that's a pretty good reason to sort of question it and not have like a high credence in it. Another reason would be just the general failure of natural theology and theistic metaphysics to provide this sort of this account for everything that's so much more so much more virtuous than what the naturalist has to offer. I just don't think that's the case. A lot of apologetics seems to me to be motivated reasoning driven by almost a weird American market of selling certainty, selling books every 6 months about how to defend your faith, how to convert the non-believer, stuff like that. And even more recently, philosophy of religion has sort of been commodified in this way by certain people in Christian circles who I think have an interest in painting the narrative as Christian philosophers of religion. This is the intellectually respectable side to be on because of all these Christian philosophers of religion, and really atheists are just kind of grasping at straws, or maybe there's this Graham Oppy guy, but and I don't think that that's true. I think within philosophy of religion that naturalists, that atheists actually do have a lot of really good stuff to say that's on par or better than what Christians have to say in a lot of areas on a lot of these questions. So it's not that I have these sort of intellectual reasons that just compel me towards thinking, yeah, I've got to believe in God in the same way that I think I've got to believe in a particular theory about gravity or something like that because of the sort of agreement of relevant experts in the area type thing, or the arguments in favor of it and the way that it just works or something. So basically I can see how I could take either position. And I think what I do, it's not that I have like a 50-50 credence or something. It's more that I choose to withhold making a judgment about that, even though I've and this is where it gets kind of complicated, and even I wonder if I'm being self-contradictory in certain ways, but it's that this is a hope that I have, that there's this all good God that's behind reality. But I can see that it's not something that, I mean, if I had to, and I got really desperate, I guess I could radicalize myself into a toxic apologist who just comes out with these arguments and tries to convince people that they work. And I could see how I could, do the opposite and say, just bang the table and say there's no evidence for. Well, I mean, those aren't the only options either that are out there. But I just think that the honest answer is that I don't know. There's good reasons either way, but I'm also compelled to live in the face of uncertainty, and that comes back to my sort of, I don't know if maybe it is just a prudential reason of it makes me a more moral person, and I enjoy more living within the Christian paradigm.
Yeah, I think there's this idea that like people are afraid of just saying, I don't know. Like, it seems like what you've said so far is, well, not so far, but just in the blog post is like, you don't know with certainty some of these beliefs, but you still have faith, which you define a certain way. But I think that some of the apologetics, again, this is a little bit speculative, but I think it's driven by this somewhat of an anxiety to, like, if I am warranted in believing this, it has to be because, it works some way. It has to be because
right.
arguments are good. And if I find out that they're not good, then there's no other way that I could believe this. And
right.
so I think that motivates. And so you're an example of someone who can say, like, I don't know, these arguments suck, some of them, but like, you have a way of being a Christian or trying to be. Yeah. So one of the other things that you had said, well, what are your thoughts on religion? I mean, you gave a lot of different sayings about religion. And one of the things was, so why aren't you confident Christianity is true? Look at all the evidence. I mean, you're just present the truth and unrighteous. Look at all the evidence for the resurrection. Why don't you know Christianity is true or some other religion?
Well, I mean, firstly, I suppose I've never seen someone resurrect from the dead would be a pretty good reason to not think that a claim from very far in the past, just if that's all we're going off to start off with, to not think that that's true. And then the second reason is that even as we begin to layer in that evidence, I have a hard time seeing how that becomes good enough to then justify the belief in a way that should compel someone who isn't already convinced that it happened. Right. There are really good explanations, especially when you take into account all that modern psychology has to tell us about bereavement hallucinations or socialization effects. I mean, I don't think that every Sunday at 11 o'clock, Pentecostals are really experiencing Jesus manifest, but they're going to report that they are, and there's something going on there. And I think that that's probably a group psychology thing. It's probably got something to do with after the service, wasn't the Spirit really powerful today? Retelling the narrative. And is that going on in sort of around the time the Gospels are being written and in the early church? Yeah, for sure, definitely, that's a factor. And so I can't kind of discount that, and that can sort of explain away a good chunk of what's going on with the evidence there to do with Christianity. It just isn't rationally compelling in the same way it seems to be to some people who make these kind of resurrection apologetics and say that it's just so obvious. It just doesn't appear that way to me. Also, as we get back into that time period, we look at non-Christian writings about there's sort of similar claims about weird stuff, maybe not attested to in exactly the same way that Christianity is, but nonetheless, some of these claims have pretty good evidence in favor of them. And then as we do New Testament criticism and we look into the kind of thought world of the people at the time, so how do we do history? Well, Second Temple Jews would think it's perfectly legitimate to read the Old Testament and sort of just write history based off that. If you've already got the belief that this guy's the Messiah and that he's predicted in the Old Testament, well, then it's a perfectly legitimate thing to do, to basically fill in gaps in stories where if you're not quite sure, by literally copying. And I think that's something that went on. So there's a bunch of natural explanations basically from history, New Testament studies, Old Testament studies that account for this stuff. And even looking at prophecy, so all the prophetic kind of literature, it seems to get the history right up to a point, and then it starts going pretty badly wrong, and that's quite consistent with all the prophecy. And the point where it starts going wrong tends to be the point where where people are dating it, and there's various different arguments for that. But it seems that loads of this stuff is written kind of after the fact. Then they try to sort of I think the technical term is something like antedate themselves. So you see this in the Revelation of John. You see this in Daniel, where it seems like they're trying to sort of antedate themselves, and but by saying things that are sort of like, oh, come on, like this is after 9/11 happened, so it's definitely not in 2005. Like they'll say stuff that kind of sounds like that, just to say, yeah, I'm definitely writing this later, but then make it seem like it's prophecy about the temple being destroyed, for example, or something like that. And the New Testament criticism just undermines those arguments by what I need to think of like a specific example. Nothing's coming to mind right now, so I shouldn't have gone down that route. but yeah, just to say, I don't think that the historical evidence is that good. I'm not sure the philosophical arguments are that good. I hate the abuse of Bayes' theorem. I don't think it does what they think it does. And I see all these really, really awful attempts to just say stuff that seems irrelevant to me. Like, from God's point of view, the probability would be 1 of Jesus resurrecting if that was going to happen. It's like, well, what does that? I don't have God's point of view, so what the hell's that supposed to do for me? Like,
Yeah, I've heard it. One of the analogies, I think it was Matthew Harkey who said it, but it's like kind of like, the picture of the Loch Ness monster or something. If you're already predisposed to believe in the Loch Ness monster, then you're gonna be like, wow, this picture. And if you're not, you're like, okay, this is a fake picture. So I've heard that the evidence for the resurrection compared to that. When you were talking about the Second Temple, Judaism, I think the New Testament use of the Old Testament was a big thing for me, kind of deconstructing when I finally realized there's a context you can fit this in. It's not just random. It's not just, I've read these, quote unquote, prophetic fulfillments as a Christian over and over. And I've kind of, in the back of my mind, I was like, out of Egypt, I called my son. I think you're stretching to Matthew.
Right.
Or, like, I've had those thoughts before, but then when you kind of find out that there's this historical context that's embedded, this is how they used the Bible in this period. They were, I guess it's the Qumran. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but there's different communities that use scripture to speak to their own present time and kind of manipulated, as it were, or massaged some of the prophetic stuff in the Old Testament to fit their current context. And I think Peter Enns, there's an Inspiration and Incarnation. I don't know if you read that book, but that was a huge eye-opening book for me. And I think people should read that just to get more of what we're saying there. But so one of the other things that's interesting too is the effects of religion. And you compared how for you, like, intrinsic religiosity, I can't speak, is helpful, but even for others, you kind of conceded that it might not be, religion might not be helpful for them, but it is for you. So I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit more on that kind of.
Yeah, definitely. So I suppose an easy way of sort of contrasting those two words that sound kind of technical, like extrinsic religiosity and intrinsic, would be, extrinsic would sort of be performances of religion. So what does, if you think of like what's the character a religious person adopts, and if you're in a community where you want people to see you that way, it's taking on those sort of characteristics, whereas the intrinsic religiosity is more when it's sort of being done for its own sake, personally, individually. And I think particularly Michael Jones, for all his sins, is pretty good when it comes to talking about this stuff, about the benefits of religion in debates with people who can be quite dogmatic about how evil it is. He shows through a bunch of studies how intrinsic religiosity has been shown to be beneficial empirically. Now, in my personal experience, this intrinsic religiosity can bear out as devotionally reading the Bible. Now, that doesn't mean reading the Bible in a way where I sort of think God's got a special message for me today, and I'm going to just open it to a page and sort of think, oh yeah, that really was about how that person was a bit snappy with me at work or something. Right. It's not like that. I look at it more as these being these complicated human texts of people who, in very different thought worlds, were trying to figure out something similar to me, which is sort of, how do we live and what's the best way of doing that? And so I like to meditate on the Bible, and I like to do that with groups of other people as well who are interested in doing that. That's really beneficial to sort of setting my mind in the right place, I think. And then, or even I tried meditation and stuff, like Sam Harris's app and Headspace. And I've found, for whatever reason, that doesn't work as well for me as prayer. So I think that having a time for prayer in my personal life, especially towards the end of the day, before I do the dishes and go to bed or something, just has a therapeutic effect. If I feel kind of stressed or I've been having a bad day, it has this therapeutic effect. And then also, I think the symbolism of ceremony. So within Christianity, say the idea that a day should be set aside as special for rest helps me to approach Sunday with a bit more of an idea that if I've had a really busy week, it's important that I set this time apart to be a kind of special time that's distinct and set apart from the rest of the week. And that doesn't mean that there's something really special going on there, but I think it's of psychological benefit and relevance to me personally. And similarly with church services, where I just enjoy being in that community. I think I enjoy the time afterwards where people will talk about what's going on in their life. You find out a bit about other people. You can maybe offer a bit of advice, and they can offer a bit of advice to you. And singing as well. So it's not even that when singing hymns that I necessarily take it to be that this is like the choir of angels praising Yahweh around his throne or something, but I do see it as a quite beautiful thing when people can get together and collectively kind of make this beautiful noise about what to them is their highest good, and that is really valuable to participate in, and sort of psychologically sets me up to, again, it's this idea of, I think, a special time that's set aside from the sort of day-to-day just working and doing normal stuff. For whatever reason, it helps me personally.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how well, obviously there's a range of whether people practice religion in fundamentalist ways or whatever, but about how whether religion affects them positively or negatively. So, for example, when I was deconstructing, my wife was still a Christian for a while, and that caused a tremendous amount of pain in our marriage at the beginning. Yeah, but I would say that she's probably, like, now that she's kind of, I guess I don't know if she considers herself an agnostic. I don't know what exactly now, but since we kind of don't practice religion anymore, I feel like she's honestly like flourishing more than I am. Even though not that I'm not flourishing, but I'm just saying me as someone watching someone I care about, it seems like for her leaving religious belief was almost, it turned out better than I anticipated, just based on the experiences we had, going up, because it was, there's all this like belief in eternal consciousness. I mean, again, we were part of a confessional Calvinist church. So there's all those kind of beliefs baked into what we're talking about. So I'm sure there's Christians watching this, like, you didn't go to my branch of Christianity. That's why. Okay, maybe possible, but I don't think so. But anyway, like, so initially leaving some of these kind of beliefs was really painful in our marriage. And, there was a lot of like fighting and, crying on her part. But then as it kind of settled, she kind of embraced, like, I don't know, maybe there's something out there, maybe there's not. I guess, again, like, I don't know what she would, define herself as, but just in general, it seems like for her, that was the best thing, leaving that kind of religion. And what you're saying is, for you, and again, you're not saying you're a fundamentalist kind of Christian, so I got to be careful with what I'm saying. But for you, this religiosity is meaningful for you in a way that it might not be for other people. So there's just range of experiences, what I'm trying to say with.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I imagine, I mean, I can imagine as well, particularly for women, where they're told a certain story about who they are in virtue of their gender, that can be particularly beneficial to leave that kind of toxicity behind. And I think as well, for me, I had a lot of benefits from leaving the Christianity I was in. Mm-hmm. It's just that I think after going through that time, I can now see, well, how did that make me a bad person? But what were the good parts, and sort of now try and put it all together. And maybe this isn't the right thing, or will turn out not to be, but that's where I see myself as being now. Right.
So one of the things you've alluded to is that you're not a fan of, religious apologetics as it's tended to be practiced. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that? Your thoughts on religious apologetics?
Well, I think it's just this idea of worldview salesmanship. I really don't like it. Anyone who studies philosophy for an amount of time, any amount of time really, will come to realize that it's really, really difficult to put together a position for almost anything. Everything is open to counter arguments. There aren't just these knockdown arguments that compel everyone to believe. And when it comes to Christianity, it seems like they've exploited how difficult philosophy is and created a sort of atmosphere where they can train certain people and weaponize terminology that everyday folk aren't going to be used to, and ways of thinking about things that, unless you've had, a time period of your life set apart to reading books and thinking about these things, you're just not going to have responses to. And they've kind of weaponized this stuff and decided, well, we can use it to go out into the world and just bonk people, ordinary people over the head with. And I'm really opposed to that, because it doesn't, I mean, let's say say you show me that there's a contradiction between two propositions that I believe, or that I am committed to two premises, but I deny a conclusion, and that conclusion should follow from the premises. That doesn't mean I should just straight away accept what you've got to tell me then about that or anything else. It just means maybe I've got to go away and rethink things. And it's never presented in this kind of well, let's just think about what we believe. Let's try and form some true beliefs. Let's build up our worldview in a healthy way. It's this idea that a worldview is like a holistic thing, and you've either got the rational one, or any of the others are irrational. And there's never, or very infrequently, do I see this sort of honest engagement in questions about morality or the way that the world is, honest engagement with the doubts of people who are within Christianity. It's almost always this packaging of it up, and sort of this veneer of philosophy, and the philosophy itself isn't even always that good or sophisticated. If I think William Lane Craig's incredibly smart, for example, but the amount of risky positions he takes to get his philosophy to work, the amount of work he has to do, and the consensus that he's against in terms of his interpretations of time, of quantum mechanics, just to get the Kalam to work, it seems to me, it's not right of me to say this because I don't know him personally, but it seems dishonest to me. I can't imagine myself being genuinely convinced as he is of those things while being aware of all the things that he is. And it's even more disappointing, knowing that he's aware of the objections, to see him as an advocate for philosophy, never talking about the difficulties involved for the positions. And if he was like, well, this is what I think, and I'm genuinely convinced this is true, but here's all the issues for the position, and this is a minority position, so I'd have a lot more respect. But it's this idea that, logically and inescapably, the premise follows from the conclusions. He likes to say stuff like that, and then other people. I think it's particularly a young man thing, to be honest, where you don't want to feel silly for holding these beliefs that are really important to you, so it drives you to dressing up your conclusions in a philosophical veneer that you can then go out and debate people with, and the most toxic people sort of gravitate towards kind of precept and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it particularly is, I think, a young man or an insecure type thing, where then you can kind of go out there and project your insecurities on other people. And I just don't think philosophy should be used that way. I think philosophy is really interesting. It can be a great tool for, and it can just be this beautiful thing where you can engage historically with what a bunch of smart people have had to say and try and figure things out. And that's how it should be done. It should be used to improve the way that people live, and it shouldn't be used as just a weapon to fight people. I hate that.
Debate me, bro. I'm going to prove you wrong. Well, first of all, Craig has the Holy Spirit, so he knows, apart from any argument, that is true. Wow. And so the other thing too was, one of the things that seems like you're encouraging and saying is that we should have, like, not just say we have epistemic humility, but have like a true sort of epistemic humility. And it seems like one of the things, for me that was important was once I started really digging, because I shared my faith. I would walk people through The Reason for God by Tim Keller and have a beer with them, and over many weeks. So I was really invested in this kind of thing. And because I was so invested in it, it drove me to study like biblical scholarship and philosophy. I'm not an expert in either of those, but still it drove me deeper into those issues, because I wanted to, I wanted people to know Jesus and all this stuff. But once I started to do that, I started to realize how, like you've been saying, some of these positions are not as certain as you're being sold that they are. And
exactly.
Once you start to realize that, and this is one of the reasons I think that the way that and I had a conversation with Dry Apologist the other week, and he gave, his reasons why for thinking that apologetics, some of his issues with apologetics, but one of mine is, I think, and it can go both ways too, but the issue is when you sell something as like super certain, when in reality, if someone takes not a couple minutes, but like any kind of serious time to kind of dig deeper into what you're saying, they're going to realize, there's a lot more going on here than you're telling me is going on here. And the kind of confidence you're selling me is not matching, what the reality of these fields is. And so when you're trying to sell someone that the Bible is inerrant in a strict sense, and then they just read read a book. I mean, that's a little bit mean, but like read a book in normal biblical scholarship, you're going to see that this is not like, okay, maybe it's like these big, anti-God people. There's a conspiracy and all these people, mainstream position. They all, anyway, you can adopt those kind of, under a rock positions if you want to, but it's just for the normal person that kind of digs deeper, they're going to see that there's, the emperor has no clothes.
I think doing that. Oh, sorry, you won't finish.
No, but go ahead.
I think doing that is very psychologically unhealthy, and it leads to, I don't know, it leads to this sort of horrible repression that can sort of psychologically backfire as well. Right. Because there's a part of you that knows that you're not being honest with yourself when you do that. And then you just find yourself sort of twisted into psychological knots trying to make something work that doesn't. So I actually even almost feel sorry for people when they're like trapped in that way of thinking where they can't just be honest with what they actually do think.
Yeah. And again, it's important to note that, like, we're sharing our experience. And I would identify with that because I think in the back of my mind, so for example, one of the things in my own life is my brother became an atheist when he was a teenager. And so that kind of, that kind of motivated me to learn more and like do all this other stuff. But, in the midst of conversations with him, I would, and other people, I would be, pushing myself to a point where like, I kind of had a still small voice note, like, stretching the truth here, not stretching the truth, but it's not being fully honest with your own doubts or cognitive dissonance and stuff like that. So, and what I want to say is, it's possible, hypothetically possible, that there's some fundamentalist out there who doesn't have these kind of cognitive things going on in their heads. But I think what we're saying is based on our own experience and the testimony of other people that have left, we know that, we had these experiences. So likely extrapolating from that, other people are likely having these experiences as well. So I want to be careful because I do think anytime you say stuff like that, oh, don't psychoanalyze me, but I think you can psychoanalyze people in a careful way if you're just saying, here's us sharing our experiences, and there's tons of testimony of people that have left or deconstructed that's what they were going through. So it's likely that a lot of other people are going through that as well. So,
I think there are criticisms of the arguments as well, but I think the thing that I don't like to see is when people believe for these, like the reason people convert in the first place, when they say that it's for these psychological reasons, and then they say, well, don't psychologize me, now just assess it based on the 15 years of tithe funded PhD that I've done, that you're never going to have the time to rebut all these points that I've memorized. And it's like, well, why don't we talk about, because if I'm talking to you as a person, it's like, well, don't you actually have these doubts? It's like, yeah, but I'm just convinced of the soundness of the ontological argument. There's so many, like, I think there is a place for it. And I think it can be hiding. It can be a sort of coping mechanism almost to just say, just focus on the premises.
Yeah. So I've got you to, tear down stuff for a while, but now I want to kind of switch to the build up section. So how can, how on your view, how can Christianity be practiced well?
Well, I think being honest is a big part of it. So I have a very difficult time with the types of people where I see where they're Christians and they engage in all those things that we've just been kind of talking about that are bad. The apologetics, the selling of certainty, the motivated reasoning about dating of books and so forth, when it's like, this is just plainly wrong. Stop doing it. Just engage. Whereas when people have been honest about where they're at and like, oh yeah, I can see that. Let's see what this does for my belief now. When people have been more concerned with just following the truth where it leads them, following the dialectic, engaging with me as a person in the context of having these conversations and stuff that are valuable to me. Those have been the good times. And I think that Christianity would flourish more if there was more of that going on. And then I think that the beneficial context that Christianity has is that within the kind of ecclesial setup that it's got, there's basically people who facilitate these kind of conversations, social gatherings, outreach, and Christians should be doing more to have cross-community like meals and stuff where people get together, share their experiences, are pulled away from just watching Netflix in the evening and going through social media. Also teaching people languages, people who are migrating from other countries. The church can do so many really cool and beautiful things. And Christianity can be great when it does that, because I think, and it's not to say there's people who are effective altruists and stuff like that who manage to do it on atheism. Unfortunately, I'm not one of those people where that works for. But I think when you're within that Christian story, you do have a sort of you have a kind of motor to do these sorts of things, and you should be doing more of it. Otherwise, what's the point of having this big building if it's literally just there for the this kind of random ceremony that you do every once in a while?
Yeah, I feel like there's this among people that are skeptic or non-Christians or atheists or whatever. There's this idea that either religion is either it's this black and white view towards religion. It's like either all toxic or well, I guess some Christians. Well, I don't even think all Christians would say it's all good, but just in general, there's this view that I think is wrong. That and that's why I have a narrow with my content. My goal is to undermine what I take to be fundamentalism primarily. And that has to do with certain beliefs that I think are stupid, but it also has to do with certain attitudes towards beliefs. So even, I do sometimes talk about arguments against the existence of God, but my point is not to say that God definitely doesn't exist. You know what I mean? And you're all dumb for believing in God, Sky Daddy, blah, blah. It's more to say it's more complicated than some people make it out. Here are reasons why, someone could not be persuaded that there's this triomni God you're talking about. So, it's just, black and white thinking, I think, is not good. So one of the other things too, what do you have? You use the word faith. You have a section of what you have faith in. So what do you have faith in, and what do you mean by faith?
I mean, I'm not entirely clear what I mean by it. There's a sort of famous paper in philosophy of religion, or it was more of a discourse. I think it was published in a university magazine between, was it John Hick, R.M. Hare, and R.B. Braithwaite? Maybe those are the right people, about religious belief and verification. And
Mm-hmm.
there's the whole if it's not falsifiable, it's not. Oh, and Anthony Flew was actually one of them. Sorry. And if it's not falsifiable, then it's not meaningful type position. And within that discourse, I forget which one of them, someone puts forward this idea of beliefs that are just kind of blicks. They're just these sort of dispositions that don't go away. It's almost like a Gestalt shift, with the duck rabbit, where you kind of look at it and you can see the rabbit or you see the duck. And I think for me, there's in my sort of narrative, my first person experience of reality, I can see the sort of reductionist scientific story and how that makes sense of things. But the sort of duck, the other way of looking at it, this idea that it's part of a story that has cosmic significance, that there really is an importance to trying to reduce suffering, rather than, I could say from that other story, right? Well, if there's no people involved that you're reducing suffering for, like, who cares anyway? If it's that's a mind dependent thing. Who cares? But the other view is like, well, it really is good, and I can't get away from that. And so what I take faith to be is sort of that persistent other way of looking at things. And in my opinion, that's a really beautiful way of looking at things, because it has in it the idea of this God that's omnipotent, that's omnibenevolent, that genuinely does care. And even if it's not intellectually defensible, this idea that despite all the suffering of the world, one day it'll be set right. And I think that I can always see that in the background, and it doesn't go away, can actually drive me to do a lot of good things that the other kind of view of things wouldn't do, like that kind of helping the homeless guy, which I normally just wouldn't do.
Right. I wrote down next to, it seems like you're, well, I'm used an analogy, but is hope sort of synonymous with how you're using faith?
I think, that's probably it. I suppose I ought to think about it more, and I probably should have thought about it more before posting the blog post, but I just don't have a good definition of what faith is, because it's clearly something that's really important to me. in terms of these beliefs that I have. But at the same time, I don't think that these beliefs are, you know, in the same way that if I knew something about science or some pretty non-risky philosophical position that most people are committed to, and you didn't know it, I could probably just show you it, and like you know, you'd see it and go, oh yeah, that must be right. Whereas religion just isn't one of those things. I don't think the stories are good and work in that way. I can see all these issues, but then I can still see the story, and it's this sort of beautiful thing, and it drives me, and it's really valuable, and all that. And it doesn't, I don't know, it compels me to live slightly differently, and that's how I'm using faith. And that's where I say, well, for all I know, maybe a particular Christian interpretation is right. Maybe it's just by the grace of God that I have these beliefs. You know, it's by sensus divinitatis, and it's nothing to do with me. But again, that seems sort of implausible to me. So I don't know what it is.
Yeah. And that's what's interesting about it, is because, you know, people on both sides will look at what you're saying and kind of filter it through their own narrative. Exactly. That they tell. So they're going to tell some people, they're going to tell the story of, well, he just can't let go of it because God's real and God's on his heart. And exactly. Everyone else can be like, he can't let go of it because he's indoctrinated. And these beliefs were appealing to him and he likes it. And so because he likes it and was indoctrinated, then that's why he can't let go. So you're just coming at this. Well, people are going to watch this, and whoever watches it is going to come at, not everyone's going to do it exactly in the same way, but they're going to come at it from different perspectives of kind of trying to rationalize what you're saying. And one of the other things too was, it sounds like you're, I guess, would you call yourself a universalist? You're a Christian. You would use the word Christian. Yeah. It seems like you're kind of in that direction.
But I have a really hard time with all of that supernatural stuff, because I don't really, other than perhaps the good, or, you know, like good things, moral goodness. There isn't much that I would sort of say is that I think is non-natural. And even that, there's a pretty good psychological account, right? So I have a really hard time with all the stuff that's involved in Christian eschatology and but it's that story that God is reconciling the cosmos to himself. That's part of that other narrative I can see that just makes the world a really beautiful place to be a part of. And it means if I'm talking to someone and I think, and I sort of have this background hope that my life is a part of this story of a good God, making whatever's wrong with the world right and reconciling the world to himself. It sort of makes me think, well, I want to be like that. I want to sort of bring that into the conversation I'm having or into the work that I'm doing, and it translates in all these ways. And you could just say, well, that's purely psychological, and obviously you have a better time because then, you know, you're doing your work instead of just browsing social media, or and that feels better. And that could be the case. That's all there is to it. And another person, it could be the case that it really is, you know, like the Holy Spirit guiding me or something, right?
Right. Yeah, I think that's interesting too, because I've said before that if you're using faith in the way, and you're defining it in terms of hope, I've said publicly before that I hope Christian universalism is true. Right. So, I mean, according to some definitions, that's a kind of faith. But I guess for maybe the difference between us is that I have that hope, and it doesn't really cause me to feel the need to like participate in any kind of religion, or to me, I'm thinking of like, I don't know what my credence would be, but just in general, you know, I don't think there's a God, but you know, on the off chance, it's not on the off chance, but it just seems like that hope that it's, because it is a beautiful story. Like, I think the idea that all the suffering and all, human and animal, somehow could be redeemed. You know, like I read David Bentley Hart's book, That All Shall Be Saved, and I was like, damn it, you know, I hope you're right.
Yeah.
But I don't think you are. But if you are, that would be great.
Yeah.
And one of the things too is that I think about is, if that kind of a God is real, you know, it doesn't really worry me in the sense of like, from my perspective, I'm kind of on a journey of intellectual honesty with my beliefs. And so even if that kind of a God existed, I don't think like he's going to be like, I'm going to smite you for like your doubts about me. Because obviously the world is the way it is. You know, I think it's open to interpretation. There's a lot of reasons to think that there's not an all-loving God or whatever. So yeah, that was one of the things I was trying to decipher, like what is the difference between us? Because I would say that I hope that what you hope is true true as well.
Yeah.
But you have gone the route of you want to consider yourself a Christian and kind of move in that direction. So, and I wouldn't necessarily do that because I would just, and I've compared, and maybe it's not a perfect analogy, but I've compared it to like, someone, people buy lottery tickets, even though they kind of know in the back of their mind they're not going to win the lottery. It's kind of, to me, Christian universalism is one of those things like where I'm buying a lottery ticket. Like I really hope this is true, but like in my mind, like deep in my mind, I don't think it is. But even that hope sort of gives me, it's kind of like, yes, my picture of reality, and not everyone would agree, but again, maybe this is my indoctrination talking, but like, I do think that worldview is more appealing to me, some kind of Christian universalism. But it's I don't know. I'm losing my train of thought, but I don't know if you have any more thoughts.
Well, I think I was thinking as you were speaking as well that is pretty much the position I'm in. Like as I look outside at the clouds and stuff, and I think like what God's going to change reality? What the hell does that mean? I don't even know if there is a God. I don't. Where's this supernatural stuff happening? It's a beautiful story, but it could be just that. Like Frozen's a beautiful story, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're similar. Maybe the difference perhaps is that I have decided that for me there's some value in engaging with that Christian tradition, maybe trying to, not that I think there's too much of a chance of this, but in the small way that I can, trying to reform it from within to make it a healthier and better thing. And I think because I'm doing that, I wanted to be honest with the way that I want to live, and not sort of, say like I'm doing all this, say, counter apologetic stuff online, for example. And I didn't want, and then people would be like, oh, well, here's what Nathan thinks because he's doing that. And then find out I'm going to church and I really like having Bible studies or something, and be like, well, is it, is he a liar? Or it just felt like it was the honest thing for me to do.
Your story was suspicious from the very beginning, Nathan. So
yeah, well, yeah, you're referring to that, yeah. It just felt like, it feels to me like the honest thing for me to do because of how I'm choosing to live, and I think that the way I'm choosing to live is what works. It's not that this is the best way for everyone, but for me, it seems at the minute like it is the best way, and I just want to be honest about that.
Right. I guess what I was trying to get at before I kind of remembered is that, like, I think a lot of people who are kind of in the bubble of Christianity, they might have doubts, but they think if I become a non-believer or something, or you might lose hope or something. And I think this is where epistemic humility kind of comes in. If you have real epistemic humility, even if you're convinced that you're right about something, you have that possibility that you might be wrong about it. And even that possibility, even if you don't choose to practice like you're choosing to practice, doesn't necessarily, that hope alone doesn't mean that you have to be a nihilist. So, and not that atheism entails nihilism. There's all kinds of objective moral, like Eric Willenberg. You can look at all these kinds of things on atheism. You can have objective morality, but the idea that atheism necessarily leads to hopelessness, I just think is flawed, because you could be an epistemically humble atheist and think, yeah, I was raised to believe this stuff, and yeah, I would prefer it if it was true. And my view of reality is a little bit bleaker than in my opinion, because not everyone agrees. Some people like some people are like, I don't want to live forever. Just shut the lights off when I die. But you can have, and you could go the route that Nathan's going, or you can be an atheist and have epistemic humility and be like, I think this logically, even though it might not be true in the end, hopefully I'm wrong. Like, I think this, but hope I'm wrong about it. Right. You can have that kind of position. And even if you think the Christian story is more hopeful, or some other religion, it doesn't entail that your life has to just have no meaning and whatever. You could, you could hope you're wrong. You could be on your deathbed and thinking, what's going to happen? Like, even though I don't think anything's going to happen, Go ahead.
This is the point I was going to say about the sort of, it is almost superfluous to say you don't have objective meaning on atheism, because the objectivity of the meaning would be from a standpoint that no one has access to. So it's irrelevant. It's not the only, whether you're experiencing objective meaning or subjective meaning, the appearance is exactly the same to a mind like mine and sort of everyone else who I know around me, whether it's just a psychological, whether it's just a moist robot chemicals in the mind, or it's like a divine thought that somehow interacts with a soul or something. It appears exactly the same to that person, and so it sort of makes for even if you sort of shift out of a Christian or Muslim or whatever worldview that sort of gives you that ultimacy to the meaning or to the kind of like teleology or whatever, it's not like your experience of things being meaningful goes away. Like you still have that experience, it's still beauty. It's just that what I think it is just a different story that you're telling yourself about why that's there, and then making sense of it in a slightly different way.
So one of the last things too was you ended your blog post, and I thought it was really a good way to end it, was with an illustration. So you're saying I'm trying to be a Christian. I would consider myself a Christian. And then rather than kind of give more arguments for it, you're like, let me explain in my own life to explain to everyone else how this manifests in my life and why like I'm coming to these conclusions. And you illustrated. I don't know if you want to illustrate it now and like kind of go through
what happened. I can tell. I can vaguely sort of retell the story. I don't know if I wrote it better or if I'll say it better, but basically I had that day been watching a documentary on Albert Schweitzer, who was was he German or Hungarian? I'm pretty sure he's German, a theologian, a New Testament scholar. And he's the guy, if you ever hear the term, like the quest of the historical Jesus, he's that person. And he was pretty critical, I suppose, of Orthodox Christianity, how the way that Orthodox Christians would interpret what the New Testament has to say, the history that they'd put behind it. But when he reached, I think it was age 30, I think he was sort of in his own mind trying to parallel what had gone on in the life of Jesus and Jesus' kind of call to ministry. He basically decided that this ivory tower, he was also writing a bunch of organ music and stuff at the time, but this kind of ivory tower, just thinking about things, isn't really what the heart of Christianity is about, and that he wanted his life to be his argument. So he began training alongside doing his organ music and theology professorship and whatever else, studying to be a doctor in the evenings. And he'd stay up studying through the night, keeping his feet in a bowl of cold water and stuff like that, until he passed his medical degree or whatever the weird equivalent was back then, and appealed then to the Paris Mission Society to have funding to go and go on mission to help people. Now, they initially didn't want to help him because of his sort of non-orthodox heretical beliefs. And so he actually promised not to teach any Christianity or any theology to the people while he was on mission, and literally just to go and do like the physical stuff. And so he went to French Equatorial Guinea, set up this hospital, and he was corresponding with people throughout this time. So a lot of his thought is kind of documented. And I guess for him, I think he thought, despite these various questions and things, the idea of the Christ is this idea of a God who kind of suffers for us. And he has this whole philosophy that he calls a reverence for life, a reverence for sort of vegans and vegetarians should probably be more on board with what he's saying as well, because he's saying that we have to kind of extend the circle of compassion to all of life, not just to human beings. And so this is kind of his guiding force, as it were, behind him doing all these things that I take to be really good. And this was just a really powerful story, a really kind of moving. I don't know how else to really articulate it. Just something really good that someone did, motivated by an idea of Christianity. And that thought stuck with me as I went to get my shopping in the evening. And so I went to the supermarket to get some food, and there's always a homeless person sat outside the front of Asda. And I think maybe for the past few weeks, I've been kind of like walking past and thinking, I just don't want anything to do with that. It's kind of awkward to engage, and they're kind of dirty and stuff. So I don't want to, or who knows what they're going to say. It's just, I can just ignore it and get on with my day. And I guess I remember, though, when I was a fundamentalist sort of evangelical type, that I would, because I thought that it was really important to God to help these sorts of people. And interestingly, I didn't extend this same sort of compassion to people who were gay or thought differently from me. But whatever. When it came to homeless people, I would give them food when I could. And I guess this time that I was going to the shops, I reflected back to that, and I always get a sort of, I always get a sort of feeling of empathy or sympathy that I should be doing something to help these people who are humans like me and suffering in this position. And I don't want to paint it like it was some grand gesture or something, but it was really significant to me that the framing of it in the context of thinking about Albert Schweitzer, thinking about God, motivated me to talk to this guy and just say, are you all right? How are you doing? Can I get you anything? I wasn't going to give him money because I don't know how he'll spend it. And he said, oh yeah, if you could get me a can of Coke, that'd be great. So as I went in, I got my stuff. It's not really that much more of an expense for me. Got him some Coke and I think a bag of flapjacks or something. And as I went out, I gave it to him. And as I walked off, he said, oh, God bless or something. And I said, I didn't think, yeah, this is, like God's providence, like a secret message that God's embedded in reality or something. But the thing that struck with me was that I actually behaved that way, and I just wouldn't usually behave in that way. And I like being that person. It makes me feel good, but I also think it is good. If I were a third person bystander and I could make someone else be that way, I'd want to. And, this sort of just left me thinking, well, what is the role that God can play in my thought and in my life? I mean, fair enough. I don't believe it in the same way that like a William Lane Craig or someone does, but in the background, I have that sort of hope that it is that way. And can I sort of keep that to make me act in this way that makes me be a better person? And I guess I've just been contemplating on that these past few weeks, and that's what led me to writing the blog post, and also thinking about. For a while I've been going to like church Zoom meetings and stuff while I've been while it's been in lockdown, but then thinking, maybe I actually do want to really be a part of Christianity. And okay, I with the I don't want to say wisdom, like I'm some wise person or something, but with the experience that I now have that I didn't initially have, when people are being super toxic about in-group, out-group, or weird theology or whatever, I mean, I can stick up for myself, or I can sort of say, well, here's why that's wrong and harmful, but I can also be a part of those good things that I think my life misses now. And that's what I want to give a go. And I thought, well, to be honest with myself, I've got to kind of communicate this to my audience because I've got a fair few people who watch me and listen to the things I have to say as well. So I'm going to write a blog post about it, and as I try and process this.
You're hereby canceled. No more. No, but I think that was an interesting example. One, because I think it was really clear. But now, I didn't think about this till just now. And I was thinking about my wife and how deconverting kind of affected her, but she actually a similar story, except the opposite. This is the other kind of thing where it's person relative. So she, in the past had felt sort of compelled or whatever to like, even though she might not want to in the moment, to like help homeless people, not like, but she came home once and was like, yeah, I gave money like to a homeless person, because some Christians are like, oh, you got to give them food. I think you mentioned that too, but she's like, yeah, actually, I just gave him like, I don't know if it was like something in the range of $5 to $20. And like, I've never felt that good doing it because I didn't feel like I was compelled to do it. Like I felt like I just did it because I was empathetic. There was no other reason for me to do that other than just, I wanted to do that. And so for her, she interpreted that as in like kind of, I think my cat is starting to scream. She says you're wrong. I should just stop right now. So yeah, but it was interesting to me how in her experience, she's basically filtering the same kind of, kind of analogous experience. And she's saying, I never felt so free doing something like this. And so I think it's important, again, for whoever watches this, that a lot of this is person relative. And for some people, like you're saying, it's helpful to you to kind of fit your life in this sort of narrative, but that might not be true for everyone. So I don't think people should hear you saying, and I think you've been pretty clear that everyone has to, fit their lives in this narrative or whatever, Definitely. or that, only through this narrative can you be a good person or whatever. You're saying, for me, it's helping me be a better person and has brought benefits to my life. So
yeah, definitely. I'm saying it's true for me, and then Frank Chorek can shout, there is no truth. Is that true? So when someone says it's true for me, what do you say? Like I'm the apologist nightmare. But
yeah. Well, I think that's probably, we've been going over, well, close to an hour and a half, but I think that's probably a good place to end it. And I think the main takeaway is that religion has no benefits, and Nathan's great learning is driving him mad. I'm just kidding. No, this is really fun. I'm glad you kind of short notice we threw this together, but I think people will like listening to this conversation and hearing you elaborate on a lot of the stuff that you said in the blog post. So, and we can talk a little bit after I end the broadcast too. So
yeah, no problem.
All right. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks.